Hi, I'm Marcella, and I wish I were making this up, but my 7-year-old son was kicked out of my parents' house for crying. They said he was overreacting. They called him dramatic. They told me I was the problem. But when the judge heard what my son remembered, that's when they cried. That's when the lies cracked open. That's when the whole family image they'd built started to rot from the inside. So what did he remember? And why did it break them more than it broke me? Let me take you back to the day silence became survival, and truth stopped asking for permission. I wish I could say we walked into my parents' house with the comfort of family, but that would be a lie. The late afternoon sun blanketed the neighborhood in gold, making the porch railings glint, the flower beds look perfectly trimmed, the kind of place you'd imagine laughter came easy. But for me, every step up that porch felt like I was swallowing warm vinegar. Ezra ran ahead, barefoot on the bricks, his toy plane clutched in one hand, his curls bouncing as he leapt the final step like a superhero. I almost smiled, until I saw my father's eyes dart toward him from the living room window. His jaw clenched, his expression fixed in that familiar look, one that said children should be seen, not heard, not here. Inside, the air smelled of lemon cleaner and pot roast. Vera, my mother, was at the stove, her lips curved in a polite smile that never touched her eyes. "There she is," she said as I stepped into the kitchen, like I was a long-lost cousin and not her daughter. "Hey, Mom," I said, kissing her cheek. She smelled like old perfume and responsibility. "Where's Callista?" "Oh, you know her. Always fashionably late," she said, stirring the gravy like it had offended her. "But she'll be here before dinner." Carlton was seated in his usual chair under the ceiling fan, flipping through a sports magazine he didn't seem to read. "Tell that boy to stop stomping around. Sounds like a herd of elephants out there." "He's 7, Dad," I replied, trying to keep it light. "He's just excited." Carlton scoffed. "Excited to break something." Ezra burst in at that moment, his cheeks flushed, a scab forming on one knee from where he'd tripped on the stone path outside. He looked up at his grandfather, beaming, eager to share something. But before he could open his mouth, Carlton snapped, "Boy, stop acting like a girl, toughen up." Ezra flinched. I moved toward him, but Vera was quicker with her voice. "You always overreact when it comes to that child," she said, not looking up from the cutting board. I crouched to Ezra's level and held his face gently. "It's okay to cry," I whispered, brushing away the tear he tried so hard to hide. But he didn't believe me. Not really, because in this house, crying wasn't an emotion. It was a weakness. I stood and stared at my parents. "Why is tenderness a crime here?" I asked, not expecting an answer. They didn't give me one. Later that evening, after helping set the table and making small talk so thin it could evaporate, I walked past the mantel in the hallway and froze. There, among the family photos, birthdays, vacations, Callista's charity award dinners, was a frame with my photo turned face down. My heart stopped. It was the one from 3 years ago, me holding a younger Ezra in front of the community center's mural we painted together. His smile was wide. Mine looked tired, but proud. I reached for it, turned it upright. A perfect outline of dust framed the glass. "Mom!" I called out, holding up the frame. "Why is this picture flipped?" Vera glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "It must have fallen. I haven't gotten around to fixing it." But I knew dust doesn't lie. Ezra appeared beside me and looked up at the frame, then at me. He didn't ask anything. He just tugged my sleeve. I put the frame down, straightened it. There was no point arguing over symbolism they pretended wasn't there. We spent the night there, as expected. Dinner came and went. Callista finally arrived 2 hours late, dazzling as ever, bringing wine and compliments that felt like subtle knives. Ezra barely ate. Carlton made a joke about raising him on kale and weakness. No one laughed. Or maybe they did, and I just didn't hear it. By the time I tucked Ezra into the guest bed, the house was quiet, except for the rhythmic tick of the old hallway clock. I pulled the covers over him, kissed his forehead. He didn't speak for a while. His eyes searched the ceiling, probably following some imaginary stars he had drawn in his mind to escape the weight in the room. Then he turned to me. "Mommy," he whispered, "why does Grandpa get mad when I cry?" I sat still, my heart folding in half. How do you explain to a child that some people bleed so long in silence, they teach others to do the same, that their fear of vulnerability is louder than your love? I took a breath. "Some people never learned how to cry," I said slowly, "so they make others feel wrong for it." He nodded. That was enough, for now. He curled into my chest, seeking warmth I was determined to give. As I reached to turn off the lamp beside the bed, my eyes caught the mantel in the hallway one last time. The photo was face down again. Dinner that night was meatloaf, green beans overcooked to mush, and that same dry cornbread Carlton insisted was just the way real men eat it. Ezra poked at the food without touching it, his smile fading with every minute he stayed seated at that table. I could see it, that quiet flicker of retreat in his eyes, like the light behind them was slowly dimming. "You need to eat, Ezra," Vera said, her voice even, sweetly threatening. "Don't be rude." He glanced at me, then at the plate. "It makes my stomach hurt, like last time." Carlton's hand hit the table so hard the silverware jumped. "This is what I'm talking about. He's soft. You spoil him, Marcella." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out fast enough to block what came next. "Get that boy out of my house if he can't learn some respect." Ezra froze. Everyone did. Vera stayed seated, didn't even flinch. "What?" I said, blinking like I misheard. Carlton stood, pointing to the door. "You heard me. Take your little crybaby and go." Ezra was already up, shoulders curled inward like he could disappear if he just made himself small enough. I grabbed his hand before he could stumble trying to run. "Let's go," I said quietly. "Don't come back," Carlton shouted after us as I opened the door. "Not until that boy learns what it means to be a man." The slam of that door behind us didn't just end a meal, it ended a myth. The porch was lit, our shadows long on the front lawn as we walked to the car. A few neighbors across the street peeked from their windows, but no one waved. No one asked if we were okay. Not that I expected them to. Ezra didn't cry, but I could see the effort it took him not to. Inside the car, the silence was heavier than anything Carlton could have screamed. I started the engine, pulling away without turning on the radio, letting the hush settle around us. About a mile out, I had to pull over. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I was breathing, but not deep enough to feel real air. "Mommy?" Ezra's voice cracked like thin glass. "I didn't mean to be bad." I turned in my seat, looked at him. His little hands clutched around the hem of his shirt, eyes too wide, too aware. "You weren't bad," I said. "You were honest. That's brave." He nodded like he wasn't sure if he believed me. I wanted to scream, wanted to turn the car around and tell them exactly what kind of damage they were proud of. But I didn't. I had Ezra to think about. My rage had to wait. On the drive home, I found myself thinking back to that Sunday at church, just a few weeks ago. Ezra had clung to my hand after the service, refusing to hug Carlton goodbye. Vera had pulled him aside with a tight grip. "That was rude," she hissed. "You hug your elders." "I don't want to," he whispered. I had intervened. "We're teaching him about consent, Mom. He's allowed to say no." She rolled her eyes. "Don't use your fancy words to cover disrespect." That had been their mantra since I was a kid. Obedience over understanding, silence over sincerity. In their house, I muttered under my breath as we pulled into the driveway, love is a duty, not a right. Ezra was asleep when I carried him inside. His body, though small, felt heavy in my arms, like all the weight he carried had settled into his bones. I laid him gently on the couch and went back to get his overnight bag from the car. As I unzipped it, I found it. a crumpled piece of notebook paper shoved between a pair of socks. In blocky letters that only a 7-year-old could write, it read, "Sorry I was bad. I'll be better next time." I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. "No, baby," I whispered, crumpling the note. "Next time, they'll be sorry." I walked into the kitchen and pulled my phone from the charger. My thumb hovered over a name I had saved years ago, but never called. Not until now. I tapped the number. The line rang once, then twice. A woman's voice answered, "Dana Williams, Family Law." I swallowed. Then, with every ounce of resolve that door slam had given me, I said, "I need to talk about protecting my son." The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the comforting kind of quiet. It was the kind that hums beneath your skin, like a warning siren only you can hear. Ezra had fallen asleep on the couch, curled around his blanket like a boy trying to make himself small enough to disappear. His fingers still clutched the crumpled note he'd written. I didn't have the heart to take it from him, though I wanted to burn it. I sat in the armchair nearby, the room lit only by the warm, muted glow of a corner lamp. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, indifferent to the storm still settling inside me. My mind wandered, not forward, but backward to a time I had forced myself to forget. But memories don't stay buried forever. They just wait until your guard is down. It was almost a year ago, early fall. I had taken a week-long work trip, my first in years, and left Ezra with my parents because at the time, I still believed they were capable of offering care without cost. When I returned, Ezra didn't run to me like he usually did. He looked at me, nodded, and went back to coloring. The next morning, I noticed it. He didn't look me in the eyes when I asked about his week. When I raised my voice ever so slightly because he spilled juice on the couch, he flinched. I remember feeling my heart cave in. A few days later, while sorting laundry, I came across one of his drawings. It was of our house, but the people in it had no faces, no mouths, just two figures with X's over their eyes. I told myself he was experimenting with style. That's what I wanted to believe, that it was just art. But deep down, I knew better. I just didn't want to know. Another memory surfaced. Callista's birthday last December. Ezra had spent hours making her a card, cut-out shapes, glitter glue, a wobbly drawing of her holding balloons. He was so proud. I remember how carefully he carried it into the party. He handed it to her with both hands, beaming. She glanced at it, barely skimmed the cover. "That's cute," she said, then turned to the box from Aunt Jenna. "Ooh, what did she get me?" By the time the cake was served, Ezra's card was in the trash, half covered in frosting. Later that night, as we were leaving, Ezra looked up at me and asked, "Should I not make things anymore?" I didn't have an answer then. I still don't. Back in the present, I looked over at him now, asleep, the crease between his eyebrows deep even in slumber. A child should never sleep like that, tense, guarded. A child should never learn to mute himself to survive. I pulled a blanket over his shoulders and sat back down, trying to remember all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. But peace wasn't what it bought us. It was silence paid for in damage. I thought about how often I told myself it wasn't that bad, that they meant well, that family was messy but worth keeping intact. But the truth? I was doing exactly what they trained me to do. Minimize, dismiss, forget. When people disappear emotionally long enough, you start inventing reasons to excuse their absence. You create narratives just to fill in the empty space where care should have been. I had done that my whole life. Now I was watching my son do it too. No more. I checked the clock, almost midnight. I leaned back and closed my eyes, just for a moment. That's when I heard it. A soft whimper. Ezra was stirring, legs kicking slightly under the blanket. I rushed over. He was still asleep, but his lips were moving. I leaned in. "No, I'm real. I'm real." I touched his cheek. "Ezra, it's okay. You're safe." He woke with a start, eyes wild for a split second before finding mine. "I dreamed Grandpa told me I wasn't real," he said. His voice was small, almost ashamed. I wrapped my arms around him, held him close. "You are real," I whispered. "You are everything that's good and true and real." He nodded against my chest. I waited until his breathing softened again before I gently laid him back down. Then I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. The title, Statement of Events, Ezra Dawson. No more pretending. The next morning was quiet, unnervingly so. I dropped Ezra off at school, kissed the top of his head a little longer than usual. He didn't say much. He'd stopped asking about the night at my parents' house, but I could tell it still clung to him like smoke after a fire. Back home, I opened my laptop to get through the day's workload, but my phone buzzed before I could even start typing. A message from Callista. "Family dinner this Friday, Ezra too. Let's move on." I read it 3 times. There was no, "Hey, how are you?" No acknowledgement, no apology. Just a calendar invite disguised as goodwill. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I didn't respond. Instead, I whispered to myself, "In this family, forgetting is the real tradition." They weren't asking us to come back. They were demanding we return to the roles we were expected to play. Smile, nod, sit still, look grateful. But my silence had started to feel more honest than any of their words. While I waited for my coffee to finish brewing, my mind wandered. No, dragged me back to that birthday party a year ago. Callista's house, her balloons, her polished smile, the wine glasses that never stayed empty. Ezra had worked for hours on a card for her. It had drawings of them both, stick figures holding hands, with stars and cupcakes floating in the background. I'd helped him spell "Happy Birthday, Auntie Callie" in gold marker. He'd handed it to her with both hands, eyes glowing. Callista took it with one hand, barely looked at it, then turned to a box wrapped in silver ribbon. "That's cute, but let's see what Aunt Jenna got me," she said, her voice sweetened for the audience. I watched his shoulders drop, his grip loosen. Later, I found his card tossed on the table next to an empty wine bottle, the corner bent and damp with condensation. That night, on the drive home, he whispered, "Should I not make things anymore?" I lied and told him yes, he should, but something in me cracked. And then there was the video. A month before that, at another family barbecue, Ezra had gotten overwhelmed by the noise and lights. He had a small meltdown, arms flapping, tears forming. Nothing unusual for a sensitive child navigating chaos. But Callista, ever the documentarian of other people's discomfort, had pulled out her phone. She filmed him, not for a memory, but for entertainment. She posted it to her close friend's Instagram story with the caption, "Raising Drama Queens." I found out because a cousin, one of the quieter, kinder ones, sent me a screenshot. "Just thought you should know," they said. I confronted Callista the next day. She rolled her eyes and laughed. "Oh, come on, Marcella. It was a joke. You're so uptight." "A joke that cost him dignity," I replied, "and me trust." I hadn't forgotten, but I had swallowed it, like so many other moments in that house, that family, that performance we called love. And now, as I scrolled through my feed during a break between Zoom calls, I saw it. Another curated photo of Callista. This time, it was a sponsored post about family resilience for a parenting brand. In the photo, she stood in front of a fireplace decorated for fall. Around her were framed pictures of family moments, but not all the family. One of the images had clearly been cropped. It was the same picnic photo I had of us from years ago, but this version cut out me and Ezra entirely. Her caption read, "Family isn't perfect, but love makes it whole." The comments poured in. "You're such a strong example of modern motherhood." "Your family is goals." "Wish more aunts cared like you do." I sat there stunned. When did she get so good at being the victim in a story she didn't even live? That was the moment something shifted. I closed my browser, opened my private drive, and started a new document. Then another, and another. Screenshots, messages, dates, voicemails, photos, copies of Ezra's sketches, notes from his therapist. My own notes, from years ago when I thought I was journaling for therapy, not evidence. "They want peace?" I muttered. "Let's start with the truth." For the first time, I labeled the folder not as memories or journals, but simply evidence. It wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. I had spent so long trying to preserve their version of the story. The polished one, the polite one. But behind every polished family portrait was a cropped-out child and a mother no one asked about. A few hours later, just as I was about to log off for the evening, my phone buzzed again. It was a push notification from a parenting blog Callista often appeared on. Family feature, Meet the Woman Helping Kids Thrive, from her own household. I stared at the headline, then read it again. From her household? My jaw clenched. They had no idea what kind of woman she really was, what kind of house she came from. I clicked on the blog's contact page, typed the subject line, "Before you run this, you should know." And then I started writing. 2 mornings after Callista's message, I sat in my kitchen, the steam from my coffee rising like questions I no longer wanted to ask. I opened her text again, reread the same 6 words. Family dinner this Friday. Ezra, too. No context, no apology. Just an expectation dressed as an invitation. I typed slowly. There will be no dinner where my son is invisible. Thanks, but no thanks. I hit send before I could soften it. Then I closed the thread and opened my journal. The first line I wrote, "This is the last time I bite my tongue." The pen didn't glide, it carved. As I wrote, a memory crept in without knocking. Last Thanksgiving. The hallway of my parents' home had always been a gallery of curated pride. Callista's graduation, Carlton's military service, their wedding in the 70s. Even cousins I hadn't seen in a decade had their photos framed and dusted. I noticed then, ours was missing. No photo of me and Ezra. Not even the one from his kindergarten graduation, the one Vera had framed herself a year before. I had asked casually, not to accuse. "Hey, wasn't there a photo of us here last year?" Carlton didn't even look up from his glass. "We're trying to keep it current. You're hardly around." No anger, just a dismissal so practiced it felt like routine. But it wasn't about being current. It was about being curated, being erased. And now they wanted us back. At what? A table? A stage? A sacrifice? I took a long sip of coffee, then opened the voice memos app on my phone. There it was. Untouched. Unplayed. Since I recorded it that summer during a backyard BBQ. Carlton's voice echoed back through the speaker, sharp as ever. "Ezra, sit down or you don't eat." The background was filled with the sound of clinking utensils, laughter that ignored discomfort, and then Ezra's soft whimper. Vera's voice followed. Calm, cold. "If he's going to act like that, maybe he doesn't need dessert." I paused the playback, hands still. That wasn't parenting. That was performance punishment. And I'd stood there, watching, thinking silence kept things from falling apart. But the silence was the fall. I saved the memo under a new folder. Court ready. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. I texted Dana, an old friend from college now working in family law. We hadn't spoken much since graduation, but I remembered her being sharp. Sharp in the way people are when they've had to carve their own space in this world. She replied within minutes. "Come by tomorrow. Bring everything." That night, I went through old emails, printed voicemails, grabbed screenshots of messages I'd kept buried in the cloud. Times they called me unstable, overreactive, emotional. Times I was told Ezra was too sensitive, too dramatic. And always, it was framed like concern. I wasn't building a file. I was finally telling the story in full, I didn't know if I was ready to sue. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. But I knew this much. They weren't going to gaslight my son the way they'd done to me. It was late when Ezra padded into the room in his pajama pants, clutching a drawing. He held it up to me, his version of our apartment, our couch, our dog, his desk with the lamp he picked out himself. It was a little skewed, but full of color. 2 stick figures stood in the center. Me. Him. I didn't put Grandma and Grandpa, he said softly. I forgot what they look like. I didn't correct him. I just kissed his forehead, took the drawing, and pinned it to the fridge. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table again, opened a new document, and began drafting a timeline. Every time they ignored him, every moment they dismissed me, every subtle cruelty masked as concern. They forgot me long ago. Now I remembered everything. The doorbell rang. Startled, I walked to the door and found a courier standing with a thick manila envelope in his hand. He confirmed my name, then handed it over. The return address read, Callista Media LLC, legal notice. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for a full hour before I opened it. Heavy cardstock, slick and cold. The return address read, Callista Media LLC. No explanation, no warning, just an envelope that reeked of performance. Inside was a cease and desist letter. Slander, character harm, digital defamation. The words were thick, artificial, legal speak meant to intimidate. It accused me of publicly damaging her reputation with implied accusations. She even cited my one post, 6 words long. Sometimes silence is just another form of cruelty. I laughed, not out of amusement, out of something harder, sharper. So she wants to play public? I said out loud, setting the paper down with care. Fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was wired but focused. I knew Callista, knew her need to control the narrative. She didn't care about truth. She cared about image. By morning, I was on the county court's public records portal. I searched my name, my full name, middle initial and all, and waited for the screen to load. There it was. Filed 3 days ago, Vera Dawson had submitted a formal declaration opposing my expansion of legal custody over Ezra. Her stated reason? Emotional instability, exaggerated responses, and a pattern of isolating the child from extended family support. Support? They called it support? I didn't even blink. I picked up the phone and dialed Dana. She answered on the second ring. She's trying to position you as unstable, I said, my voice flat. Dana exhaled through the receiver. Marcella, this isn't a custody fight anymore. It's a legacy battle, and you're rewriting the script. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Later that evening, after putting Ezra to bed, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with his sketch pad in my lap. He'd left it open to a new page, a drawing I hadn't seen before. There was a tall figure with big hands and no face, standing above a smaller child curled in the corner, arms wrapped around his knees. A scribbled word floated above the smaller figure. Me. I flipped through a few more pages, all in pencil, just pencil, no color. When Ezra wandered in to get water, I asked, as casually as I could, "Why don't you use your markers anymore, bud?" He shrugged. "Because if I draw something wrong, I can erase it." I stared at him for a long second. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. They'd taught him that even his expressions needed permission. After he fell asleep again, I gathered my laptop, phone, and every document I'd been quietly collecting over the years. Screenshots, voicemails, therapist notes, transcripts, Ezra's drawings, my own recordings. And I created a folder called Ezra Archive. I didn't cry while I organized it. I wrote a timeline, dated, annotated, precise. Jan 12. Ezra told you're too soft after crying. No comfort given. Mar 5. Carlton yelled at him over spilled juice. Ezra hid for 20 minutes. June 19th. BBQ. Ezra refused to hug Carlton, told he was being disrespectful. It was no longer grief, it was preparation. They wanted to make this about law? Then I'd make sure the law saw everything. I was uploading a video file when my phone rang. Dana again. "We'll need two things," she said. A statement from Ezra's therapist, and someone outside the family who witnessed something. I was quiet for a beat. Then it came to me. Brielle, my cousin. She was there that day at the barbecue. She'd seen Carlton's hand rise, seen Ezra shrink before it even landed. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. I opened a blank message. "Hi, this is Marcella Dawson. You probably don't remember me, but you saw something at that BBQ last June. I think it's time we talked." I hit send before I could overthink it. Across town, her phone lit up. I met Brielle at a small cafe just off Main Street. One of those places with creaky floors and mismatched chairs where the coffee always tastes a little too strong, but no one minds because it's honest at least. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at a window table with her phone face down and her hands folded like she'd rehearsed whatever she was about to say. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as I slid into the seat across from her. She nodded. "I didn't want to get involved." "I get it. But what they did, what they keep doing, it's not defensible anymore." Her voice cracked a little, like she wasn't used to confronting the truths we'd all been taught to ignore. She stirred her coffee. "Vera's been telling people you're overreacting again, that you're twisting Ezra's behavior to make her and Carlton look bad." I expected it. I didn't even flinch. "What really got me," Brielle continued, "was that day, the barbecue." Carlton raised his hand. I froze. I saw it. Ezra didn't even wait for it to land. He flinched, like he'd already memorized what came next. The silence between us hung heavier than anything she'd just said. I nodded, slowly. Then she added, almost in a whisper, "And there was that time with the drawing." I looked up. It was Callista's engagement party. Ezra made a card. He worked so hard on it, even tried to match the colors of her dress. Vera looked at it and said, "Don't waste your time if you can't do it right the first time." Then she ripped it in half. My throat tightened. Ezra just said, "It's okay, I'll make another," like he already knew that love came with conditions. Brielle wiped at her eyes. I didn't speak up. I didn't know how. I stayed quiet. Let the weight of her shame sit there between us. I didn't have to forgive her in that moment. I just had to listen. We paid for our coffees in silence. Outside, the wind had picked up, as if the weather knew something was shifting too. Back home, I booted up my laptop and found a message from my tech contact. A simple email. "Recovered that audio you flagged. File attached." I opened it, bracing myself. Carlton's voice came through first. "Ezra, get your butt in the chair or you're not eating." Ezra's voice followed, softer, trembly. "I don't like meatloaf." Then Vera, calm, clipped. "Stop that noise. Be useful." The next sound was Ezra crying. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just defeated. I closed the file and renamed it July BBQ full.wav, then moved it to the archive. I whispered to the screen, "They erased love. I'm restoring truth." Then I emailed the file to Dana. The subject line read, "This is what my son calls family." Her reply came minutes later. "This changes everything." I took a breath. Then opened Facebook and posted a single sentence. "When silence becomes betrayal, truth becomes duty. Stay tuned." I didn't tag anyone, didn't say a name, but the message was clear. Within an hour, the post had dozens of likes. A few quiet relatives messaged me directly. One said, "Finally." Another sent only a heart. But one caught my eye. A message from a local reporter. "Would you be open to talking? I think this story matters." That night, just as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Carlton's voice, sharp and scathing. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but we're done playing nice. Families don't drag each other through mud." I replayed it twice, then uploaded the audio to my legal folder. Then, to the quiet room around me, I whispered, "Then stop being the mud." The next morning, as I reached for my laptop, a new notification lit up my screen. Subject: Family Court Filing. Request for grandparent visitation. From Vera and Carlton Dawson. The Greenville County Courthouse smelled like old varnish and second chances that never came. Ezra clung to my hand, dressed in the blue blazer he picked out himself. His shoes were freshly cleaned, but the scuff on the toe betrayed how often he kicked the playground curb when nervous. Dana met us on the steps, files in hand, face unreadable as always. "No dramatics," she whispered. "Just truth." "And that's more than enough." I squeezed Ezra's hand and leaned down to meet his eyes. "You're not the one who should be afraid to walk into this room." He nodded. Not fast, but with the kind of still resolve I hadn't seen in him before. The courtroom was cold. The kind of cold that isn't about temperature, but about posture, performance, silence. Vera sat beside Carlton at the front, both dressed like they were here for church and not judgment. Callista was conspicuously absent, which meant something, or nothing. When the judge called Ezra's name, he looked at me first. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to," I whispered. He nodded again, then walked up with Dana beside him and his therapist, Dr. Nira, just behind. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Ezra, do you want to tell us anything today?" Ezra swallowed. His voice trembled at first, but he didn't waver. "They made me feel like I don't deserve hugs when I cry." The room went still. Even Carlton shifted. Vera looked down. Ezra's eyes never left the judge. "I wasn't being bad. I just didn't know what to do. Grandpa yelled, and Grandma said. She said if I told anyone, no one would love me again." A sharp inhale came from the bench behind me. Dana stood and played the recovered recording. Carlton shouting, Ezra sobbing, Vera's voice, cool and sharp. "Stop that noise! Be useful!" The courtroom held its breath. A court officer flinched. Someone murmured, "Jesus!" The judge's gavel came down gently. "This court finds no overreaction here," she said. "Only chronic invalidation of a child. What we call discipline matters less than how it lands, and in this case, it landed like trauma." She turned to Vera and Carlton. "Your petition for grandparent visitation is denied. Indefinitely." Then to me, "Full custodial authority remains with Ms. Dawson. This case is closed." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But I exhaled, deep, full, and free. Outside, the spring air felt newer, lighter. But the moment wasn't over. Callista was waiting near the curb, sunglasses on, jaw clenched. I knew that stance. It was the Callista version of damage control. "You're really going to drag all of us into the gutter like this?" she hissed. I looked her dead in the eye. "You're already there. I just turned on the lights." She didn't blink, just reached into her bag and handed me a thick manila envelope. "You'll want to read this before you get too comfortable," she said, then walked off like the world still owed her something. I held the envelope without opening it. Not yet. The envelope was still sealed when I brought it inside. I placed it on the kitchen counter, beside the mug I'd been reheating for the third time that morning. I stared at it while Ezra played in the living room, building something with Legos that didn't have to make sense to anyone but him. I peeled it open slowly. Callista never did anything quickly, but her message always landed hard. Inside, a typed petition, accusations of defamation, interference with professional partnerships, and character damage. Attached were screenshots of my Facebook post, out-of-context text threads, and cherry-picked comments from strangers praising me for speaking up. So this was her move. From silence to slander. From passive smiles to printed threats. "You went from pretend peace to full war," I muttered. "Fine." I sat down at my laptop, pulled up my cloud storage, and started scrolling through the archive. Past the audio files, the therapist's notes, the legal correspondence. Until I found something I hadn't looked at in years. A home video, from when I was 16. I clicked play. The screen shook slightly. Someone had filmed this on a camcorder. The backyard. A cookout. Carlton's voice filled the frame, barking at someone out of view. Then me, walking into the shot, trying to grab a soda from the cooler. Carlton's hand snatched the can from mine. "You're not doing anything to help, as usual," he snapped. "Useless." Then the camera shifted, and in the far corner, a younger Vera yanked Ezra, just a toddler then, out of the way. "You'll turn out like your mother if you're not careful," she hissed. I froze the frame. The date in the corner said June 2008. Vera had told the court under oath there had been no issues with my upbringing, that she'd always supported my development as a mother. I renamed the clip Legacy Lie Number 1. Later that afternoon, I sat on the porch with a notebook on my lap, flipping through its pages, thinking about the first time I ever tried to tell the truth. I was 9. I had gone to my school counselor, told her my dad yelled at me all the time, that he called me lazy, dramatic, nothing like your sister. The counselor nodded, scribbled something down, and promised she'd talk to my mom. The next day, Vera showed up at the school with cookies and a rehearsed chuckle. "Marcella's always been sensitive," she told the counselor. "She gets that from my mother." That was it. No follow-up, no check-in. Just a warm smile and a cold conclusion. I looked at Ezra through the screen door. He was arranging Legos by color now, humming to himself. "They built a lifetime of denial on moments like that," I said to no one. That evening, I sent the court video to Dana. She called almost immediately. "You want to sue her back?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "No, I want something better." Dana laughed. "You always do." She arranged for me to speak with a parenting podcast I'd followed for years, one that focused on generational trauma, boundaries, and resilience. I'd always listened quietly, never commented, never wrote in. This time, I asked to speak. Let's make sure the next generation of moms knows how to recognize wolves dressed in good lighting, I told Dana. That night, as I tucked Ezra into bed, he curled up against me and whispered, "Mom, are they going to be mad again?" I didn't answer right away. "Maybe," I said finally, "but this time, we're ready." My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from a blocked number. "You think you've won. Just wait." I stared at it for a second. Then I took a screenshot and deleted the message. We had pancakes for dinner that night. Not because it was a special occasion or a tradition, just because we could. Because no one could tell us otherwise. Ezra added whipped cream on his with no guilt, no glances over his shoulder for approval or correction. "I didn't dream last night," he said between bites, syrup pooling at the corner of his mouth. "Not once." I nodded, pretending to focus on my fork, but inside, something shifted. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that. But there was a tightness in my chest that wasn't pain this time. It was release. So this is what peace starts to feel like. After dinner, I cleared the plates and opened my laptop. An email from the court awaited me. Subject line, "Case record, final ruling." I clicked through the pages, scanning through lines I'd already heard aloud, but seeing them in writing felt different. It felt permanent. One sentence caught my eye and stayed there. This child was not reacting. He was remembering. And what he remembered was pain. I printed that page, slipped it into Ezra's baby book, right between his first drawing of our house and the photo from his preschool recital. Not as a scar, as a shield. The next day, I received another message, this time from Dr. Nera. "I've drafted the formal statement," her email began. "I've also spoken with Ezra. His progress is measurable. Your instincts were correct from day one." Attached was a clean PDF document affirming what I had fought so long to prove. Then a second message followed. "I'll be a guest on the Parenting Through podcast next week. They'd love to have you co-host the episode." I stared at it for a moment. Me? I'd listened to that podcast for years, earbuds in while folding laundry or sitting in the carpool line. silently absorbing stories of women who walked away from harm and rebuilt their lives from nothing. I typed back, "If speaking saves even one Ezra, I'll speak." The ripple effect started quickly. Word got out through the community, not in headlines or breaking news, but in whispers and sidelong glances. Carlton and Vera's motion for grandparent rights had been denied. Permanently. And Callista? Her nonprofit removed her from 2 speaking engagements. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't grieve. Actions have echoes. An unsigned letter arrived in my mailbox a few days later. The return address was from one of the boards Callista had previously been honored by. The note was simple. "Thank you for reminding us to look deeper." I didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the loudest response you can give. That evening, after putting Ezra to bed, I found myself in the hallway closet. I reached for a box I hadn't opened in years, one labeled Mom's Things, letters, recipes, old notes. At the very bottom was a yellowed envelope I'd never dared to open. The handwriting was my grandmother's. Inside, a single page. At the center, in her spindly cursive, one line stood out. "Be the mother you needed, not the daughter they wanted." I folded the paper back into the envelope and returned it to the box. As I turned off the hallway light, Ezra called from his room. "Mommy?" I stepped inside. He was half asleep, eyes blinking slowly. "Tell me a story." I smiled and sat on the edge of his bed. "I will," I said, "but this one's true." Tomorrow, I'd be on a microphone, speaking to strangers. But tonight, I was exactly where I was meant to be, telling the truth, starting with him. A week after the podcast aired, I took Ezra for a walk at the park. He skipped beside me, his hand in mine, the weight of the world seeming to lift, if only slightly. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. Families filled the playground with easy laughter, tossing footballs, passing juice boxes, snapping photos. I watched them, wondering how many were performing peace while bruised beneath the smiles. Wondering if they too had learned to breathe through the tightness, to laugh through the ache. Sometimes survival looks like peace. Other times, it just looks like silence that doesn't ache anymore. Ezra tugged on my arm and pointed to the ice cream cart. I bought him a cone, and we sat on a bench shaded by a dogwood tree. He licked the scoop, lost in his own world. I watched the way the sun hit his face, highlighting how far we'd come and how far I'd carried both of us. Later that evening, after dinner, I checked my messages. Callista's Instagram had gone quiet. No new content, no promotions. Just a grid full of frozen smiles that felt like relics now. A distant aunt had texted me that Carlton and Vera were devastated, blindsided, that they didn't leave the house much, that they weren't ready to be humiliated, but they weren't devastated by what they did. They were devastated by being seen doing it. I didn't reply. That night, as I tucked Ezra in, he lay there in his bed, staring at the ceiling, with the solemn wisdom that sometimes visits children who have had to grow up too fast. "Do you think they'll say sorry?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I sat beside him and smoothed his hair back. "I think they believe silence is safer than sorry." He turned to look at me, eyes wide and certain. "Then I'm glad you didn't choose silence." I pressed my lips to his forehead and whispered, "Me too." After he fell asleep, I went to my desk, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and for the first time, wrote a letter I never intended to send. It was addressed to Vera and Carlton. Not to make them understand, but to make myself remember that I no longer needed them to. It read, "Dear Mom and Dad, thank you for the kind of childhood that taught me what not to pass on. Thank you for making strength a requirement, not an option. You didn't raise me to be weak. You raised me to survive your version of love. I've finally chosen a better one." I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my journal. The pages around it were filled with battle lines, legal arguments, therapist's notes. But this one page felt like the end of a chapter I never meant to keep rereading. I was just about to turn off the light when I noticed a small package on the doorstep. No return address. Just my name, handwritten. I brought it inside and opened it slowly. Inside was a small envelope marked Ezra in Vera's handwriting. I didn't open it. Not that night. I sat down at the edge of Ezra's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way he now curled toward comfort instead of away from it. I held the envelope in my hands, stared at it. Then I turned off the lamp and placed it in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, I'd let Ezra decide whether it ever got opened. The envelope had sat untouched on the edge of the kitchen table for 5 days. Ezra had seen it once, asked if it was a birthday card, then forgot about it just as quickly. I hadn't forgotten. That morning, I made coffee like usual, slow, methodical, quiet. I stared at the envelope while the pot hissed behind me. The handwriting on it was unmistakably hers. Vera's slanted cursive, tight and exacting. It simply read, Ezra. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. He doesn't need their words to define him, and neither do I. I walked to the shredder in the corner, flipped the switch, and fed the envelope through slowly. It disappeared with a low growl and a finality I hadn't expected to feel. Closure doesn't come from them, I whispered. It comes from me. Later that day, I took Ezra on a drive north to the lake in North Carolina we used to visit when I was a kid. I hadn't been back in years, not since before I learned that even water can hold memories. But this time was different. We packed peanut butter sandwiches, apples, and 2 bottles of water. No big plan. Just us. Ezra laughed the entire hike down the hill to the water's edge, his voice echoing off the trees. The sound was pure, untouched. He ran barefoot through the soft sand, then turned and bolted into my arms. I love you because I feel safe with you, he said. I closed my eyes and held him close. That hug, it erased every lie they ever told me about love. Weeks later, the final step came quietly. No confrontation, no press release. Through a holding company, I had completed the purchase of the house my parents once rented, the one they assumed would be theirs until they died. The lease expired. They were notified of non-renewal by certified letter. I stood across the street the morning the moving truck pulled into their driveway. Vera stood on the porch, her hands wringing the edge of a tissue, eyes red but dry. Carlton paced beside her, barking instructions at the movers, his voice now just noise in the distance. They saw me. I didn't wave. I walked across the street and handed the property manager a printed note for them. It was only one sentence. Now maybe someone will finally pity you. I didn't stay to watch them leave. Some things deserve to be seen. Others, only known. That night, I sat in a small studio set with Nara for a live podcast. The lights were warm but not harsh, and the microphones picked up every breath, every truth. I didn't use their names. I didn't need to. I told the story of survival, of systems, of silence. I didn't lose a family, I said at the end. I shed a costume, and in doing so, my child got to keep his light. When the episode aired, it spread fast. People commented from all over. You gave me words I never had. This made me call my mother and just breathe. I thought I was the only one. But that wasn't the victory. That was the echo. The victory came on a Sunday afternoon, in a house where no one had to walk on eggshells. Ezra and I were decorating our living room. He held up a frame and asked where to hang it. I took it from him and smiled. It was a drawing, us holding hands, a sun in the corner, and a house labeled, The Safe Place. We nailed it above the fireplace. Ezra stood back, arms crossed like a tiny foreman. This is our forever home, right? I nodded. Yes, and no one will ever drag you out of it again. He grinned and ran off to get the next picture. And just like that, the door behind us finally closed. Not slammed, not locked, just closed.